you know, we might as well be trying to resurrect it.
Plus, haven't we heard that for decades? Centuries, even? Theater's been dying for a really long time.
But you could say the same for life itself or about the planet.
Doesn't necessarily make it true.
No. The truth is that theater is never dead. It isn't dead because it doesn't depend on money. It doesn't depend on funding. All it depends on is people.
It's the poor person's art, and it's been around for a while.
Now, there's certainly some commercially driven theater.
High production values, big name shows, lots of advertising.
And they make tons of money and bring in tons of people to watch their spectacles.
Which is great.
It sure is, but outside of high production values, theater always exists. And it exists because you need nothing to do it. All you need are bodies performing.
It's like soccer. All you need is a ball.
All you need is your imagination.
Theater can be made on the street, in a house, in an apartment, in a church, in a stable, anywhere really. Because theater needs only a performer and one audience member.
So in order to change the common misconception that the theater is dying, we need to reclaim it. Reclaim it as the poor person's art, as the rich person's art, as the art that defies economic constraints.
Now, not to say that money isn't important. I still need to pay my rent and eat and enjoy the world through alcohol like everybody else.
Right there. So, renting, theater spaces becomes expensive, and so do props, and costumes, and lighting instruments, and more rehearsal spaces and script rights.
This is where arts funding becomes really important. The more money and funding any given production will get, the more accessible the production becomes.
And practically speaking, it's simple. It's a subsidy to bring down ticket costs.
So the more funding governments give to artists, the more affordable going to the theater becomes for people in the community.
But we're a company that have never received funding, ever. Not public funding, no donations. We've applied for it, we've just never received it. So we all pooled together $100 each of our beloved dues money, and we began a theater company. And since then, we've never had to use our own personal funds to make a show.
More or less.
More or less. But 2 years and 10 shows later, we're still here. Now, this sometimes means getting extremely cheap and thus not very well-equipped venues.
In one such instance, in a site-specific performance.
Okay, so this is a really interesting concept. Essentially, a site-specific show, if anyone is unfamiliar with the term, is a show that takes place at a specific location outside of a theater.
Or site, if you will.
And with the decline of funding and available theatrical spaces and venues in Toronto, we've actually seen an explosion of this kind of work. And lucky for us, people seem to be into it.
So in our attempt at this style, we created a show called Murder on Ossington.
We staged a show in our house, leading audience members into separate rooms for each scene. The venue was free, and the show only cost us $500 to put up.
And for the first time, we were able to make enough money to actually pay our actors.
Yes. But you know, we sold out every single performance.
We had fantastic audience responses.
And for a show we considered just a fun experiment for us,
it garnered more media attention than any one of our shows in the history of our company.
Now, we don't want to create a barrier or tension between us and other artists striving for funding, but in our experience, sometimes not getting the funding you want can be a good thing. We love money, don't get us wrong, love money, it can be great, but when we don't have it, we don't let that get in the way of us putting on great theater. So it forces us as artists and as a company to be innovative
and integrative
in their thinking.
Buzzword!
With theater, less can often be more. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop applying for funding.
No. We want government funding.
But we cannot limit ourselves by the amount of money, or lack thereof, we have in our bank account.
No.
In fact, we let it inspire us.
Yeah, we can't really be objective about our own work, but Litmus Theatre Collective, they created this show that we saw this past year in Toronto.
It took place in a shed, and there were only about 12 audience members allowed in every night.
Now, because of these restraints, these artists, without government funding, created one of the most magical performances we've seen in Toronto, and garnered themselves a listing as one of the top 10 shows of the year by popular Toronto publication.
Money does not make theater. People do.
You know, theater's uniqueness comes from the relationship between performers and audience. Because unlike some other mediums, theater requires willing participants.
Now, why are we calling them participants when they're just sitting there and watching?
Because that's not all they're doing. That's not all you're doing right now, is it? You're all a part of this.
While the audience watches the actors in turn watch the audience. And whether consciously or not, a symbiotic relationship is formed. The expressions and reactions transmitted from both groups, performers and audience, has an immediate impact and sometimes can create different effects upon one and another.
It might sound a little pseudo-intellectual, but speaking from our limited experience, there is some truth to it. You know, if you go up on stage and you act, you know, to tell a story, and the audience is silent, or if the audience is loud, they laugh, they cry, they boo, you know, it will absolutely have an impact on the performance. The performer-audience relationship is wholly comprised of mutual connection, of shared moments. In essence, it's a dependency.
Okay, great. So everyone can make theater. What's good theater and what's, well, not so good?
It's immensely subjective.
But because of that, we can't really give a finite definition. That being said, here's an idea. Good theater, in our opinion, challenges its audience. As artists, that means challenging ourselves. But what are we really challenging? We do political work, but not every theater company and theater performance is political. So what we advocate at the core of our work is challenging norms.
So what are the norms of your society, of your community? Because you cannot deny that you live there.
So when you get up on stage as an artist, in our opinion, you better have something good to say.
Yeah. And being a good actor, that's great. But honestly, if you want to be a part of what we're talking about what we consider to be good theater, then you've got to challenge something. You've got to make a statement. You've got to ask a question, even if you don't know the answer. Otherwise, you're just showing off.
Theater rule number 1.
Don't be a wanker. Now, what do we mean when we say wanker?
For our part, we cringe when we see theater that shows off the magnificence of feelings.
Now, the whole thing about feelings, right? They're great. Feelings are a fantastic starting point, and they're important. When you feel something, you care about something. It's important to care about things in theater, and it's kind of important to care about things in life.
Yeah, if we didn't care about anything, then what would life mean?
So, to our fellow artists, what we would say in this little talk of ours is start with feelings. By all means, let it inspire you. But when you get up on stage and you're going to share your story with an audience, please don't stand up and just show us how good you are at feeling things.
Yeah, in our not-so-humble opinion, if an audience is enthralled by a performance simply because of how well actors can feel or how well they can portray their feelings, then the performance never moves beyond its starting point. It never expands beyond that initial inspiration, and therefore, it never reaches its potential.
Like we said, our not-so-humble opinion.
Yeah. But it's not about the audience knowing the difference between good feelings and bad feelings. It's about the audience and the performers being open to possibilities, being open to each other. Because when we're open to each other, we're also open to contradiction.
When we feel things, but we don't think we should feel them.
Or when we think we should feel things, but we don't feel anything.
So this is a dissonance. This is a bit of a confusion, and this is actually what we're after. So we can call this a theatrical moment. And as for how you can decode that theatrical moment, that's completely up to you.
So, to recap, we know anyone can do theater. We also know what we think, at least, good theater is. So now, the big question is, why? Why is theater important? Why should theater be resurrected in a society that, financially speaking, denies its existence?
Let's face facts. We've been at it doing theater on shoestring budgets, but we've also been very lucky.
Yet most theater needs funding if you want it to be accessible. And in a perfect world, this would be a lot easier, and maybe it would even be free, but that's just not reality. So why fight to keep theater going?
That's a good question. And in order to give an answer to that question, the best we can come up with is, we're not sure.
That's maybe not the answer you were expecting us to give, but we are being as honest as we can, and we're speaking from our experience. We know why we think theater is important, but we can't force others to agree with us.
That's part of the beauty of the art form, though, as we've come to know it. Whenever you go into a theater, whether you're on stage, backstage, in the audience, everybody's got the same thought somewhere in their mind, whether it be unconsciously or consciously. And that thought is, why the hell am I here? It's kind of like real life in that way, too.
Yep. And if theater is a lot like life, as many have said before, then theater is an uncharted zone. And a lot like the world we live in. Despite your best laid plans, that little X factor is always going to be there.
What if an actor misses his cue?
What if my car breaks down?
What if this whole building falls down?
What if the electricity goes out?
Wake up now.
The people on either side of you?
In front of you.
Behind you.
Do you know them?
Do you trust them? Do you feel safe?
You trust us? You do realize that anything
Anything.
could happen.
Theater is a meditation.
A communal meditation.
And you've all just been a part of it.
2 uncharted zones.
Life and imagination.
And what's one without the other?
Thank you.
Thanks so much.